It's gonna start. Okay. All right. So this is our third conversation with Imago kids and families, and we're kind of having a number of conversation with leaders and people within the Imago Day community that are in a variety of parenting situations. And the hope is, on the one hand, to realize we're all in this together and we're not alone, and we're experiencing a lot of the same things. And for if you're a parent who's going out of your mind, just recognize that's a bit of all of us in some way. This is tough for our kids, and it's tough for us. And on the other side of it, it's also to try to create some inspiration and and help each other imagine the possibilities of what parenting can be. Um, and so tonight I have the Kings, Seth and Lacey King. Seth is a he's Mago Elementary Kids Director, and then also over at you're at Refugee Care Collective. Do you mind talking about that just for a second? And then real quick, Lacey is a teacher at Portland Public and
North Clackamas, actually.
Sorry, North Clackamas.
Yeah.
I can't see on the, sorry. I see pixels, but so at North Clackamas, and I'd love, could you describe Care Collective and some of what you do teaching?
Sure.
Yeah, Refugee Care Collective, we work to mobilize faith communities, businesses, and individuals in Portland metro area to come alongside newcomers in our community. And so my role is to oversee our volunteer programs. We have a couple hundred volunteers that serve as mentors and tutors, and just figure out how we can learn from and walk with people with refugee status really well.
And I teach 6th grade in Milwaukee in a dual language program. So I teach predominantly in Spanish to both kids who speak Spanish at home and speak English at home.
Okay, sweet. And so one of the things, I think one of the ongoing assumptions that we really want to bring across to families within Imago is that we really do feel that the parents are the primary disciplers, but we also recognize that discipleship looks very different in our context, and it is not a picture perfect experience by any means, but it means being faithful as parents to tell Christ's story faithfully and to express it and live it out faithfully, regardless of how our kids respond to that or how they turn out or any of those maybe ideals within the church. And so for you, I'd love to hear a bit of your story. What are some of the bigger moments in parenting for you? What happened or what has happened?
Yeah.
And secondly, what are some of the challenges that you've had in your parenting story?
Yeah. So our parenting story started about 4 years ago. We had been at Imago for several years, had heard about Imago's kind of push and launch of what it looks like for the church to step into the spaces in foster care. And we had been considering that. We had done maybe 1 or 2 of the 8 classes that are required before you can be certified to even get into that process of having a child in foster care move into your home. And while we were walking into a summer series at Refuge, ran into another family at Imago who was fostering a young girl who, for a lot of really great reasons, needed to transition into a different space. And they were like, I bet we could get DHS to let her move in with you. It'll just be for a few months. And so a week later, that was happening, which was crazy. And we had both spent a lot of time with kids, with nieces and nephews in school and camp settings. But and so I think we thought we knew what we were getting into. I think we would have said that at the time, but we, looking back, definitely did not. And so that was one of our kids. She was 4 at the time. She's now 8. A couple days later, a teenager moved in with us who was originally from Central America, who had come to the States on her own. And so that was our first year of parenting with those 2 girls. And then about a little over a year later, our youngest, who was just about a year old, moved in with us. Um, and they're all still here 4 years later. And we've adopted the two younger ones. And our oldest is with us indefinitely, which is great. We love all of them in different ways. So that's kind of like the quick synopsis of how that story unfolded.
Yeah. And what have some of the challenges been with that? Because I would imagine there might be some.
Yeah, it would take a smaller amount of time to talk about what hasn't been a challenge. I think, as soon as you mentioned bigger moments, the first thing I thought of is just kind of how parenting naturally, I think for everybody, goes through kind of like seasons and cycles. But for us, specifically in the way that we first became parents and then what that looks like now and how it's changed over time, like we've just had so many different roles, even with the same kids, I think of when our daughter, who's about to turn 8, first came to us, and we specifically asked her to call us aunt and uncle because we were told and we were under the impression that it was going to be very temporary. And then I think about the shift like a year later when she first started calling me mom, was really close to Mother's Day. It was around this time, and it just sort of happened intermittently for a while, and it would be like mom and Aunt Lacey and going back and forth. And then I think of when she changed her last name once we knew that we were going to be finalizing our adoption, and just I don't know, each of those markers have changed our roles logistically, but also, obviously there's a lot that goes along with that too, emotionally and mentally and spiritually. With each of those shifts, like we've had to respond in a really big way. And so that's both an honor, and it's also frankly really exhausting to have to re-navigate what parenting means and what it looks like in that season pretty constantly.
Yeah.
So one of the, and maybe this is an assumption to clarify for me, I think one of the aspects of knowing a bit of your kids' stories is there is some ongoing trauma that kind of shows up, and it's not just a little bit here, a little bit there. It's what's today going to be like? What's going to come out today? What story may we hear? Or it's just the emotion of all that's gone on in the past.
Yeah.
How have you sorted through that as parents? Or maybe also what's kept you grounded as parents in that?
Yeah. Well, I think our whole approach to parenting has been really drastically different than the lives Lace or I grew up in. Like, we don't parent the same way our parents parented us, and we also, not better or worse, but we don't parent the same way most like peers we have that have kids our age that are have come into their family biologically. We parent like significantly different than that. Because the way trauma impacts a child's brain and heart and spirit is like a whole new approach to how we step into that. And so I think, like, looking at that at the beginning, we maybe thought that we were doing that well. And now I'm like so ashamed of certain ways I parented and still do, at times, as I think most parents do. But for instance, like, I think our parents might say, like, when the kids first moved into us, that we just needed to be stricter with them, and really lay down the law and have really clear discipline and really clear consequences. And man, oh man, we laid down the law and we like brought the consequences, and nothing ever worked. Because nothing, like, consequence and discipline means nothing outside of relationship, right? Nothing outside of attachment. And so, which I think is true, like I like not trying to over spiritualize, but it's true in like how we relate to God, right? Like the discipline God gives us means something because we know his heart for us. And to the rest of the world, it looks maybe like crazy, right? In the way we would interact with a God who is our God. But when we know his heart for us, it's different. And I think the same thing is true, especially with, I mean, with all kids, but there's not like an underlying assumption that our kids had coming into our family that we cared about them.
Mhm.
And in fact, like 4 years later, I mean, our almost 8-year-old tonight at bedtime prayed that God would help her remember that we're not going to send her to a new family. And we finalized adoption 6 months ago, and we've told her her family's not changing for the last year and a half. Like we are still proving over and over to her that we're sticking with her, and that might be like the rest of her life. And so that changes like everything in every like behavior. I think we're always saying like, what's the need that's not being met? Um, Even when it's things that drive us crazy, even when it's like she's actually like acting, her behavior is awful. Like we're like helping, I think we're navigating for ourselves. Like part of that is like she does have to own that, but part of it is us owning that she's not always doing that on purpose. Like it's not always coming out of a place of like trying to destroy everything. Like it's out of a place of figuring out her story and even her space in our family still. And then so I think that is like woven into like every single beautiful moment and tragic moment that we find ourselves in as a family, and figuring out what it looks like to parent them in that way.
Yeah, the two words that help me kind of separate some of those things is, or maybe three words. One would be immaturity. Like when is my child being immature, or just when am I being immature?
Yeah.
Um, and acting out in ways that are unhelpful or unhealthy or inappropriate.
Yeah.
When is my child being rebellious or willful, where they know what is best for them and they're willfully choosing darkness? And then the other one I think is, when am I when is my child just simply trying to emote, and might be emoting in a willful way or a rebellious way, but they're just needing to get the fear and frustration and anxiety out in a way that is childlike.
Yeah.
And not saying that those are always clear, but those are some categories for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you throw trauma, like complex trauma in the mix, though, I think those lines are super blurred, right? And it can, in our home, things can look really willful, but our brains and our hearts trick us, right? Like as human beings, like all of us have brains and hearts that trick us, but then when you have misfiring, you know, synapses in your brain on top of that, it just becomes that much more confusing.
Totally.
And I think for me, like something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and still to this day think about probably every single day, 4 years in, is just this idea of unrealized expectations, and expectations that I honestly did not even know I had for myself as a parent or for my future children. But I think, obviously what you grow up with is your baseline, right? And so anything that's different than my baseline makes me feel uncomfortable. And I have to like really sit with that. And again, I think it's an experience of every parent. Like, my kid is different than me. That's weird. That's uncomfortable, right? But just to the extreme in our home, right? Because, yeah, our
What are some of the ways that you two have? I know there's been counseling. I know there's been training. What are some of those tools that people could look into if they're going, I think I actually need to start addressing some of the trauma in my child's life, or maybe as a parent, even their own trauma that they've maybe never addressed, and it's starting to show up during the virus in the downtime. What has helped you become trauma informed? And I know that's I'm looking for like a few little things in a whole
Yeah.
random thing, but
Just like if I could attach a really quick anecdote to, like Seth said, our entire approach to parenting in the last 4 years has completely shifted. And just to paint you a picture, like the moment that I always think back to, 2 houses ago, we were, our daughter was having a difficult time, and we just started taking toys out of her room because we were like, this is what we experienced as children, right?
And it like worked for us.
When we acted out, we got our stuff taken away, right? And so we're like, now you can't have this. And if you do that again, let's see what we're going to take now. And now you can't have this. And I kid you not, if you can picture this scene, Seth and I are sitting in the hallway outside of her bedroom. She is still in the bedroom having a time. And her entire bedroom, except for her bed, is in the hallway with us. We had removed every single item in her room, and it had not affected her an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, like, we feel really silly, but we just were doing the best that we knew how with what we had in that moment. And of course, like, now it's so obvious to us that, like, of course, taking stuff away from a kid who's already lost everything in her life, of course, that's not going to make a difference. She's a master at surviving when she has nothing, right? So why would we ever think that reinforcing that is going to give her an opportunity to show us something different, right? And then just like logistically, we went to, like you said, some trainings and some conferences. I think largely the kind of school of thought that has helped us the most is TBRI. It's trust-based relational intervention. And it's all pretty much founded on the work of Karen Purvis.
Who loved Jesus and loved kids from hard places really well.
And she has a Parenting with Connection. I think
The Connected Child is the
yeah.
name of her book. That has like really reshaped the way we look at things. On top of like tons of counseling.
For our kids and for us.
Yeah, like all for everything. So connected parenting is huge, counseling huge. I think like largely though, I mean, I don't know. I think like the thing that's gotten us through is having really deep roots in community.
Yeah.
Having like a group of people to drop your kid off with who get your kid, or at least know they don't get your kid, and they're okay with that. Being able to like call us out on our stuff when they're like, you're like actually not seeing this the right way. Or like, you're actually like not helping your child, even though you think you are, and let us like give you this bigger perspective that you cannot see because you're in it so deep and so dark right now. So like counseling's huge, like reading books is huge. I think for me, being in community with people is far and away like the most huge thing, and surrounding ourselves really intentionally with people who are committed to like walking with us even when it's dark and like broken, and they know we might like be like out of like personal like relationship with them for months at a time because things are so chaotic, but they're not like giving up on us. Putting people in our lives like the Gobles and the Pinkertons who have like been in it and we know will like speak to us in like truth and love always.
And I think the other part in there too, about for those that don't know those families, they're a little bit ahead of you guys in their experiences. In some of what they've weathered.
Yeah.
Yeah, and knowing that there are people that you can call that you won't have to over explain the situation to.
Mhm.
Um, sometimes it's kind of hard. It's when you're already feeling so emotionally taxed and then you try and explain what you're going through to someone who's never been there. It just adds that much more of an emotional weight. And so for me, like, I would rather just not process it at all than to try and have to work extra hard to process out loud with someone who I know doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And so to be able to have people in the foster adoptive support group at Imago that I can call, and I can give them the 10-second version and they're like, yeah, I totally get what you're talking about. We've been there too. That's huge. And it makes you feel less crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
Yeah.
So this is probably the last question. How, given some of the things your kiddos have been through, given your unique experience in parenting, how has that shaped how you tell the story of Christ to your kiddos?
mm,
We talk so much about heaven. We talk about new creation so much
mm,
every single day, all throughout the day. Like from breakfast time to bedtime, we're talking about heaven, and we're talking about the way that like God has made us for more than this. Um all of the time. And even our 3-year-old the other night, he like prayed, and he's like, he usually just prays about whatever like random Bible story that we're like telling it. Like he's like, "Thank you, Jonah made it out of the belly of the fish." Um, and he said, "Thank you that you're a good and kind God, and that even when we don't act that way toward you, you don't give up on us." And I was like, "Okay, we're doing okay." Like, if our 4-year-old knows that in his heart, like that is something. So,
Yeah.
and I think we talk a lot about like the mystery of Jesus and the mystery of grace and the mystery of God. And I think that is, I mean, when we first started parenting, I was not interested in entering into the mystery of God and who he is and the way the spirit works, because that is big and confusing and I don't have the answers. And so I don't want to enter into that with my kids because I want to act like I have the answers. And we do a lot of like, I don't know, and I don't get it either. And let's lay in bed and cry and ask God all the big questions. And he might not answer us tonight. And that's okay, even though it's hard. Like, that's a pretty normal thing that we do
yeah.
and have been doing.
And I think a lot of the aspects of who God is and what that means for us that most people don't grapple with until adulthood. Like, I didn't really. Our kids are just sort of ready for that because they've already had so much more life experience than most kids at their age have had. And so our almost 8-year-old, is ready to ask the deeper questions and to wonder out loud alongside us. And so it feels kind of like this mutual like seeking of God, like together side by side, even more than us always being the teachers and them always being the recipients. And so I feel
And I think
like,
that's because in every step of parenting for us, and this is true of anyone in parenting, I think if we're like really pushing into it, like it causes us to ask more questions and it causes us to figure out where we are with God and like what pieces are we like idolizing outside of God, like even our kids, like how are we propping them up as idols rather than like worshiping God. Like I think we're like always wrestling through those things. And so it's not without like authority that we're doing it, but it is like the honesty of it is like we're still figuring it out too.
Yeah. 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 And I know, I mean, I appreciate your story in that I just think it's going to encourage a bunch of people who go, okay, I can be in process. I don't have to have it all figured out today.
Hmm.
It is a learning experience, and whatever our kids are going through, that Christ can redeem it.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, thanks a bunch. And I realize my room is getting darker and darker as the sun goes down. So it's nice and creepy now. But yeah, I just really appreciate you both, and thanks for sharing some of your story. I know it's there's still some rawness there, and love you lots.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
John.
you.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.